Black guy with a basketball. That's not too new. I wanted to bring this up because I was thinking about what to do and what to talk about with you all this afternoon. And I was in the gym a few months ago, and I was just shooting baskets. And you need to understand something here, which is, contrary to conventional wisdom, I'm not an outstanding basketball player. I'm not really an average basketball player. I suck. So this is very important, though. So I'm in the gym, and I'm kind of shooting, and I'm missing baskets quite a bit, because that's what I do. And then I hit a basket. And it was kind of interesting, because I said, well, this was good, and I hit another one. So 2 in a row, which is really good for me. And then I decided, well, maybe what I'm going to try and do is pay attention to what I did that allowed me to hit the baskets. So I'm starting to pay attention now to my core, right? So how am I sort of balancing myself? And then one of the big insights I had was about my shot. So there's something in rotating my wrist, and I realized it helped me aim. And then there was fingertips and grip, and I was able to do that. And I realized that once I did that, then I was able to actually hit more shots and more in a row. It was really, really great. And then I thought I had it done, and then I started missing again. So I said, okay, well, and then I did it again, so I just shot, and I'm getting better. And so, fast forward to today, I'm getting better. I hit maybe 3 out of 10 shots. That's not bad, right? I raise this because part of what this is an example of is what I want to talk with you about. It's blooming. I'm going to call it late blooming because I'm a little bit old to be playing basketball. No one's going to be picking me up in the NBA anytime soon. But it really is this whole idea of doing something that I thought that I couldn't do before, okay? See? I'm getting better. It's really great. I'm really intrigued by this idea of blooming, of late blooming. I'm really intrigued by this idea of seeing ourselves as something different than we thought we were before. And I talk about late blooming so lest the young people here think that this is just old folk stuff. I want to talk about blooming because I think the implied time issue is illusory. It's not really that critical because late blooming happens for gymnasts. It all happens before you're 20, right? It's a very different window. The point is, we come to a point and we are able to do something differently and something better than we can before. Now, there's some research about this, and it's really interesting research. Some of you may have read the Malcolm Gladwell article about late blooming, where he cites David Galenson, who's a sociologist, in his book, Old Masters and New Geniuses. And he talks about the difference between late bloomers and early geniuses. And he identifies this notion of experimental versus conceptual change, the whole idea that somehow people who sort of are right out of the box, young geniuses, like Picasso, for example, are able to somehow just do it. They just write, they just paint, whatever it might be. But that there are others who practice through a process of trial and error, and it takes time. Painters like Cézanne, Hitchcock in film, Wallace Amos, famous Amos cookies, Soichiro Honda, all people who actually made their marks in business and the arts and so on later in life, after a period of work and a period of change. Here's what else we know about late bloomers. We know that there are 3 different components. We know that there's an element of ability that's necessary, right? You can't bloom in something if you just have no ability to do it. And we know that ability is part genetics and it's part environment. It's nature, nurture, not nature or nurture, but nature and nurture. We know that. We know that it has to do with practice and a passion and a motivation to actually try to be better at something. And so there's persistence involved. We also know that it's about perseverance. And perseverance in the midst of obstacles, in the midst of things that get in the way, of barriers. Now, it's this third one that I find most interesting because I do a lot of work on diversity and difference. I've been studying this for a long time, and I've written and studied diversity in organizations for many years. And I really am interested in helping organizations understand how they actually derive tremendous value from the differences that are present in the organization and their ability to go and get more of those differences that they may need. That really psychs me. In the process of my work, I've ended up talking to lots of people who are different. different by race or gender, sexual orientation, disability. And what I know about those folks, and when I see that, and even when I reflect on my own experience, is that being different is hard. And in fact, it's hard in such a way that I want to even transform the word, because difference is a clean word. It's a nice word. And I want to connect difference to weirdness so that my introduction makes sense. Because I think something about being different is actually weird. And let me deepen this idea of weirdness, because I think it's not just a pleasant, cute word. I think it's a word that, from my research that I'm doing now, really incorporates a measure of difficulty, a measure of hardship, a measure of tribulation. There's an old film, it's called The Color of Fear. It was a documentary that was done about 20 years ago now. And it's men of different various ethnicities in the US talking about their experiences. And one man, Victor Lewis, he's an African-American man, goes into this very painful rage at one point. And he's talking about the way in which his blackness is intolerable to society, to American society. And you can see the pain as he's talking about it. And that word intolerable is a word that I want to hook onto, because I think that the weirdness that I'm talking about is the weirdness that evokes that kind of emotion. And it's relevant because here's where it starts to get interesting. Because in this work that I keep doing, and I work in organizations, work in lots of businesses, I end up interacting with lots of white guys. They're everywhere. It's very interesting. It's like everywhere I go, I never go to a place where I don't find one. And in my conversations with the white men that I talk to, what I find interesting is that the weirdness and the intolerance, the intolerability, and that's not really a word, but I'm going to use it for now. It's not just for people of color. It's not just for people who are different in that way. It's also for the so-called normal people. That there's weirdness that's inherent in so many people. I might even argue, and I'm going to argue, that there's weirdness that's inherent in all of us. And that particular weirdness, I think, is a resource. And so let me connect the weirdness now to late blooming, because here's how it works. What we have inside of ourselves, that unapproachable, that thing that we don't accept about ourselves, that thing that we actually see as weird, if we look at our diversity research and we learn about diversity, that is the greatest resource. That's the thing that's going to help us innovate. It's the thing that's going to help us do something and see something differently. And I want to invite you to think about an experiment. Why don't you innovate you? Why don't you pay attention and think about that thing about you that's so weird that you hold it in, that it seems unacceptable to let it out? And we have lots of ways, by the way, there are lots of barriers for these hidden parts of ourselves. There are barriers like, I'm not good enough. There are barriers like, that wouldn't be appropriate here. There's barriers like, people won't like me if I. Barriers like, I'm afraid. Part of what we're finding out in this work is that if we're willing to actually experiment and explore and push through some of those barriers, it reveals hidden parts of ourselves that are really interesting. And once catalyzed, those hidden parts of ourselves allow us to become different. I think about myself. It's not just basketball. I actually used to be a chubby. I lost about 45 pounds. Something happened. I was like 40 years old, and then weight just kept coming on my body. It was the strangest thing. And so once I realized that, I ended up losing about 45 pounds. And this was interesting because I had had an image of myself and seen in my family that we were a group of people who sort of, that's just what happens when you got older. You gained weight. And that image, that barrier, which is I can never be a person who isn't fat. I can't be that person. And part of what I was able to do was to experiment with, well, what if that weren't true? What if I was doing something differently? And it became effortless. I changed. And I think that there's something about approaching those messages and those parts of ourselves that we don't pay attention to, that really is the essence of weird, that is our own private weird. That if we can step into that, if we can explore, if we can engage that, experiment, converse, reflect, then it opens up the possibility for us to be better. And that's what late blooming is really all about. It's about being better. The world needs us to be better. I don't say that as an indictment of who we are. I actually am very positive in this sense. I think that people are great. I really do. Sort of deep down, I think there's an incredible positivity. But I also think that we have many, many problems to solve in the world. And I know from my work on diversity, what I'm talking to in organizations is always that if you want to be able to solve problems, you need new perspectives. And those perspectives come from diverse perspectives and diverse ideas coming together. We have those within us. I want to encourage you to explore and to experiment and to seek out your weirdness, to step into it, to engage it, to hug it, to embrace it. May you all bloom and keep on blooming. We really need you to do that. Thank you.